In John 10, 1-5, Jesus said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he's brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow. They will flee from him, for they don't know the voice of strangers." Probably you've heard this before. I'm not from the Middle East and not from ancient times, even though I'm old. I'm not from a culture where they raise sheep and pasture them together as a community. But what we're told is that if you lived in a village like Bethlehem, small town, where it was basically rural, it was a shepherding area, that there might be one large fold for the whole village. But there would be however many flocks there were of the people that owned sheep. So at night, for protection from the lions and the bears and whatever was there were lions and bears of some sort, because David killed a couple of them, they would bring them into the fold, and then they'd take them out for pasture in the daytime. And what we're told is that when the shepherd would come to the fold, which would be an enclosure, probably not roof, but just thick fence of some kind or wall, that he would go in and he would start calling his sheep by name. Now, you know, for most of us, anybody here raised on a farm? That becomes rarer and rarer. My uncles were farmers, several of them, and they didn't raise sheep, but they had dairy cows. And I spent a lot of time on my Uncle Harvey's farm. And most of the cows had names. And they knew their cows. I mean, you know, there were Holstein cows, so until you were there a while, most all of them looked the same to me, black and white cows, black and white cat. But they knew them by name. And they also knew their characteristics. I didn't know their characteristics. I learned one of their characteristics. They had one they called the pet. And my cousins, who were several years older than I was, they were long-legged guys, especially David. And David would get this pet, and when they were taking her out of the stanchion, they used to put them in this thing where their head was in the stanchion so they could feed while they're giving them milk. When they take them out and send them out of the barn, it wasn't unusual for him to jump on the back of that cow and sort of ride it out of the barn. It was not a real good ride. You wouldn't want to try to ride it around the pasture. But, and then to get off before it knocked him off on the door. But, so when he called a pet, I thought he meant pet. So I walked up beside the cow one day, and I wasn't afraid of cows, I was around them, but this one was pet. I just walked in and started, wow, she raised that back leg, knee in the leg. And they knew she did that. They were waiting for me to get it. But they knew their cows. And a good shepherd knew his sheep, and the shepherd knew him. So when he walked into the fold where all the sheep were mixed together and start calling his sheep out by name, his sheep would respond to him, and other people's sheep would respond to him. Now, I'd like to see that happen. I've never seen it happen. That's the story I've been told. But that's the picture we certainly get from this, isn't it? Of Jesus going in where there's lots of people and calling his own out by name. But that means the sheep have an ear attuned. I don't know if you've ever been around animals in an enclosure, but it can be a kind of a noisy place. Anybody ever go to the stockyard where the cows and sometimes horses and sometimes pigs and all that will end up waiting to go through the sale ring? You guys are missing some experience. That's fun stuff. But there's usually a lot of noise. Cows are mooing, donkeys are braying. There's not very usually very many donkeys, livestock sale. But the pigs are, I don't know why they call it a doink. It doesn't quite sound like it. they're snorting and carrying on, and it can be a pretty noisy place. And, but in the midst of that, when the shepherd would come in, the sheep would hear his voice, or at least that's the picture that Jesus gives us. That means they had their ear attuned to his voice. How many things possible if you had very many sheep in the town that two different shepherds might name one of their sheep the same? You know, there's old Blackie over there, there's Spot, or there's whatever they are. And, but so it's significant that they don't just know their name, they know the voice. And the Lord wants us to hear that about him. If we're his servants, if we're related to him, then he wants us to learn how to hear his voice. And it's not always a loud voice. Sometimes it's loud. What did Elijah learn out there when he was depressed after, you know, he whipped all the prophets of Baal, and then Jezebel's still out to kill him, and he's thinking, man, what do you have to do in this situation? He goes out under the juniper tree, and then he goes in the cave, and God says he's going to speak to him. And the big wind comes, and the storm comes by, and the fire comes by, but God wasn't in there. How did God speak to him? Still small voice. I'll tell you a funny story about that. I was trying to wake you up here. We're sitting in church one night. You ever get giddy, funny about dumb things? We're singing this very serious hymn. I can't remember what it was. I don't know, Giddy or something. But anyway, this buddy of mine sitting there, and we were believers. I mean, we were really, I was in one of my Christian phases. So we weren't making fun or scoffing, but for some reason we're singing this song, and the line in it struck us hilariously funny at the same time. It's, if by a still, small voice. I thought, that's a good place to hear a small voice if you're out by a still. Of course, you don't know what a still is. But Elijah didn't hear that kind of still voice by still. He heard a still, quiet voice. But he had to have his ears open. It wasn't in the fire, it wasn't in the storm, it was in this quiet voice that the Lord spoke to him. Have you heard that quiet voice from time to time? A lot of the promptings of the Lord, it's a quiet that seems like your own thought. But then if you hold it for a while and meditate on it a while, the conviction begins to grow. I've heard something from God. And so to have an ear attuned to hear that voice, and to learn to know his voice from other voices. To hear the Master. That's what we want to do. And if we're serving a person, if we're serving a human being, it's the same thing. If there's a clear line of who it is you're supposed to be serving, other people should be able to say just about anything they want, but they can't take you off task because your ear is attuned to what your master, what your trainer, this is be especially true in discipleship relationships or a job relationship, a specific thing. Your ear needs to be attuned to the person. And sir, you can practice that this summer. Who's in charge around here? Dan and Karen, right? So I would suggest practice this summer, no matter what's going on around you, have your ear attuned, that when certain people talk, you stop and hear what they're saying. It was interesting to me, I'm not correcting anybody, it was interesting to me last night, at the dinner table, Billy was talking about something, and he tried to bring the whole group into it. Now I realized it was time to get the dishes done. We'll address that in a little bit. But people started getting up, apparently not realizing that he was trying to bring the whole group into a conversation. Started getting up, walking away from the table, going away, and he even said something about it. Where are you all going? I'm trying to talk to you. And people didn't have an ear to hear what he was saying, and they missed what he was trying to bring out in that conversation. Now, I'm not correcting you, I'm just saying you got a chance to practice it here, because the voices that you should be hearing this summer are pretty clearly defined. Okay? So work on attentiveness, that's a good one. Now, another thing about attentiveness comes from 2 Kings chapter 2. This is a very interesting passage to me. 2 Kings chapter 2. Talk about a guy that had an ear. But on the surface, when you read this story about Elijah and Elisha, it looks like Elisha's disobedient. It says in 2 Kings 2:1, "Now when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. And Elijah said to Elisha, 'Please stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel.'" When you get a chance, get out your Bible atlas or your Bible maps or whatever, and find Gilgal and find Bethel and then find the Jordan River. Elijah's setting out on quite a long walk, quite a long journey. And he says to Elisha, "Hey, please stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha says, "As the Lord lives and you yourself live, I will not leave you." You hear what I mean when I say on the surface that sounds rebellious. What's going on here? So they went down to Bethel. And the sons of the prophet who were in Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master from over you? Take away your master from over you?" And he said, "Yeah, I know it. Keep quiet." Why? Because he had his ear tuned. So Elijah says to him again there at Bethel, "Elisha, please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." He said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I'll not leave you." So they came to Jericho. And the sons of the prophet who were at Jericho drew near to Elisha, and they said, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" All the prophets are getting the word. This is Elijah's last day. And he says, "Yes, I know it. Keep quiet. I'm not paying attention to you guys." Elijah said to him, "Please stay here, for the Lord sent me." Third time, "The Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But Elisha says, "As the Lord lives and you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 men of the sons of the prophets also went and stood at some distance from them, as they were both standing by the Jordan. And Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water, and the water was parted to one side and to the other, till the two of them could go over on dry ground. Just think what Elisha would have missed if he hadn't been there. The other guys watched it from a distance. They didn't get that far, but Elijah got to walk through the divided waters. I think that might have been a trip. And rather exciting. But that wasn't all. That wasn't what he was looking for. So when they crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Ask what I shall do for you before I'm taken with you." And Elisha said, "Please let there be a double portion of your spirit on me." And Elijah said, "You've asked a hard thing. If you see me as I'm being taken from you, it shall be so for you. But if you don't see me, it shall not be so." What if Elijah had stayed in Gilgal? He not only wouldn't have had a chance to experience the miracle of walking through the divided water, he wouldn't have been there to see it. What if he had stayed in Bethel? What if he had stayed in Jericho? Now, I don't know what Elijah's motives were. I think they probably were twofold. Elijah's thinking, he might have been feeling a little tired and weary. This is his last day. He's apparently a fairly old man. He knows what's going to happen. He may have been trying to make it easier for Elisha. But he's saying, "Hey, why don't you just stay here? I'll take this one by myself." Elijah, though, is able to hear more than his words. How many, if it was your last day, think you'd like to have somebody accompany you? Probably. Most people, when they're dying, like somebody to be nearby. But Elisha's trying to be kind to him. Elijah's trying to be kind to Elisha, but Elijah hears the intent of his heart, not just the words of his mouth. You'll miss great blessings if we don't learn to hear the intent of the heart. This isn't original with me. I heard this story from a guy. It was a significant time, but it was he had a message called "Face Your Options." You may remember my testimony yesterday. I alluded, I didn't go into detail, but I talked about a time when the Lord showed me a picture of walking with my foot in two different streams of water and telling me one or the other. I had an option. But thankfully, I heard something. The way I heard it in my humanity was, I'll bless you and I'll use you whichever place you choose. I prefer you to be here. And I chose that option. And my family experienced great blessing because we chose that option, things that we learned there. I also experienced great blessing there because the other group that I wanted to was more immature in some areas, and I missed a lot of mistakes that happened in that group because I was here. And then ultimately, when the time came, lo and behold, I'm locked in to be there forever, and the Lord speaks and confirms through our leadership and stuff, and He actually moved me over to the other thing about 7 years later. But it was interesting. That season, by getting His preference, I got foundation stones put in our family life, in community life, in a lot of things that are still part of how we try to live and build today. And I would have missed it. I'd have been embroiled in controversy and probably doing the stupid things some of the other immature guys were doing in the other place. Now, that doesn't make them bad, they just didn't know. And it was a different thing. But when you do stupid things, you get consequences you may not like. So, I'm thankful that somehow that day I was sensitive enough to hear it as I prefer you to be over here.
That's good.
Somehow Elisha heard something like that. I don't know how he heard it, but something how Elijah said, just stay here, take care of yourself. But somehow in the way he said it, Elisha heard his heart was, I really want somebody with me. Don't miss your opportunity by not deserving. That kind of thing. Now there is a time when Elijah could have said it, men, you better stay. But because he was there, he got the double portion because he saw him good. Isn't that something? And it's interesting, if you go through and study it, Elisha did almost exactly twice the recorded miracles that Elijah did. And it's interesting. All right. So, attentiveness. Hear the heart. Hear the intent of the person you're serving. Sometimes they will try to go easy on you. Make it easier for you. I don't like to demand things, especially when I'm dealing with volunteers. It's really hard for me to be hard on volunteers. But if they have a heart to hear, we get a lot more done. Right? So, here's the next one. Attentiveness was one. Faithfulness, attentiveness, carefulness. This is one of my favorites. Turn to Luke chapter 10, verse 38. Luke 10, 38. Again, this is what I'm going to share with you out of this story. Purely comes from a guy that came in and talked to us in sermons, but it made a difference in my life. Something he said that I'm going to share with you. It's really, I don't always get it down. I got to say that because my wife's here and she knows darn well I don't always get it down. But I try to work on it. Okay? Still growing. As they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. Well, that doesn't seem like a bad thing. This is a servanthood thing. But she was distracted with much serving. And she went up to the Lord and said, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. The Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you're anxious and troubled about many things. But one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion which will not be taken away from her. How many know there's times when Jesus, apparently he went to their house fairly often. These were friends. So when he's in the area, this is one of his stopping places. And there were probably times he came in and he was really glad to have somebody fix him a meal or do whatever. And Martha, just being a good hostess, I don't know if she recognized yet that he was the Messiah, but how she saw him, was she knew he was pretty special, and she wanted to put on her best. You want to put on your best? And you're hostessing somebody that's important, you're hosting. And, but that particular day, this isn't, when John tells about him going to that house, it's not long before his death. We don't know at what point it is here, because sometimes the Gospels aren't altogether ordered by the chronology of it. They're ordered by the message that the Gospel writer is trying to communicate in that particular Gospel. But whatever it was, Mary discerned what Jesus needed that day. He wanted somebody just to listen, somebody to talk to. Can you imagine what a privilege it would be to have Jesus come to your house and just want to have somebody to talk to? But you're so busy getting a glass of water or fixing a steak or doing something that you miss, that he's just wanting to share his heart with somebody.
That's good.
We can get so busy doing good stuff when sometimes the Lord doesn't, I mean, he never, honestly. One of the guys on our church shared one time said, he had a little boy. It was about, no, it wasn't in our church, it was in a church in one of Kentucky, but he was speaking in our church. His son was about 4 or 5 years old, and he had some yard work to do. And so, in order to involve his son in his life, he had his son help him. Help him. Yeah. You know, you got something. He could have been much more efficient without his son helping him. But the point of what he wanted that day was less about being efficient and getting yard work done and more about building a relationship with his son. And that boy thought he was something because he got to hold the shovel while his dad put him to, or whatever they did. And, I know for me, most people think it's boring, but one of the things I really enjoyed in the years before my dad got so busy and didn't have time to do things with me, thankfully, when I was in when I was in high school, we lived in a situation where I could get a horse and then we couldn't do other things. Dad and I would mess around with that horse together, so that gave us a little contact. But when I was young, one of my favorite things to do was go on hospital visitations with my dad. Back in those days, unless you were 12 years old, you weren't allowed in the room. So I either sat in the car or sat in the waiting room while Dad went in and visited people. And I got to be with Dad. And once in a while, if we went to Columbus, we didn't eat out, my family. Eventually, when I got a certain age, they had the first McDonald's in our area. Back in that day, it was 15 cents for a hamburger, 15 cents for French fries, and 20 cents for a milkshake, and once in a while we'd go to McDonald's. But back in those days, every once in a while, coming home from the hospital, Dad would stop at the White Castle and get some of the 8-cent hamburgers. That was big time stuff. The other thing I like to do is, he didn't usually take me on, if he had to really seriously talk to somebody or nothing, but a lot of times when he went to visit the elderly ladies in the church that couldn't get out very much and stuff, he'd take me along. They liked to see me, and I liked to go because they usually had cookies or something. But the key thing was my dad included me. He was building a relationship. And it wasn't about what we were doing, it was that we were together. The Lord is like that with us. Sometimes he has tasks for us to do. Sometimes the task he has for us to do is be there. Be there. Be in fellowship with him. So, there's two kinds of carefulness. One of them's good, one of them's bad. Martha was careful. She was caring about a lot of things. She wanted to be the best hostess she could. But in her care, and maybe it was even a good thing. Maybe Jesus just needed one thing. But what she showed in it, and it said, she was anxious and troubled. It was anxiety, anxious care. Man, I have trouble with this. When the projects get intense, and I feel over my head, I pace the floor, and I don't sleep, and till I finally can get it in the Lord's hands. And He's not frantic. He's not feverish about getting something done. So anxious care is characterized by some of these things. Anxiety, just activity for activity's sake. A lack of peace and order and confidence. Have you ever been around somebody that's busy inside and outside? It's not fun. You can be around somebody that's busy outside, but if they're not busy, if they're at peace inside, it's a whole different spirit. But boy, when the inside gets riled up with it. Distracted by too many things at once. Oh boy, I have a hard time with that one. It's really hard to get focused in on one thing. And then when I finally do get focused in, I can't even hear somebody talk to me, ask my wife about that one. It can be irritating for her. Pushing in, being so anxious to get something done, you push in without thinking the job through. How many have ever done a job without thinking it through and then wish you? Yep. How about that? That's all anxious care. A lot of times that kind of care will end up short-circuiting our result because we're fearful whether we're going to do a good job. We're fearful of the outcome. We're fearful what other people are going to think. And fear will a lot of times create a kind of anxiety that short-circuits our ability to do a job carefully. Mary, on the other hand, displayed what we'll call earnest, discerning care. She was diligently alert. She was careful. She had a sense of the right priority. Not her priority, Jesus' priority on that particular day. And so she wasn't characterized, and I can almost see Martha. I got an alliteration for it. The buzz of busyness. See Martha going. But Mary is sitting there, apparently at the Lord's feet, just listening, waiting on Him. There's two ways of waiting. And both of them are appropriate in their place. They don't call them this anymore because it's sexist or something. But we used to go to restaurants where you had waitresses and waiters. Now you have servants. You gotta take that thing out. But a waitress or a waiter is there to serve. Now, if they're not paying attention, if they're not watching what's going on, if they're not alert to your needs, if you have to come over here, and they're not doing their job, are they? But also, if they're, how many have ever had a server that came up to you? Everything okay? You're talking right in the middle of a sentence. You want this? You're right in the middle of the next sentence. You want that? You know that person.
I know that person.
There is a kind of waiting that means we're actively serving. There's another kind of waiting where we're waiting to be called upon. Not sleeping, not unattentive, but ready. Now I had a hard time with this. Remember I described my office when I was serving Hal was down in the basement, and nobody else had an office in the basement, so about the only time anybody came down there is if they wanted something out of the storeroom or if there was a meeting, and there was a meeting room down there, they're having a meeting. So basically I had a lot of liberty, and I had warning if anybody's coming because I could hear them come down the steps. That was right outside the wall of my room. And so it was very easy to get distracted, frankly, and do different things. And what I found sometimes is, the hardest thing wasn't to have a job to do. Sometimes the hardest thing was to not have a job to do. And then when somebody come down, there wasn't anything wrong with me reading a book if I was ready and on the job and ready to be called. But I'd hear him coming down the steps and I'd put the book under and get my Bible out or something to look good, man. How do you never did anything? No, my job at that point was to be there prepared when I was needed and be ready to go. Not be into something that I couldn't drop when I was needed. And so that's another kind of waiting. When Psalms talks about waiting on the Lord, that's the primary thing it's talking about. Being in such an attunement and such a hearing before God that you're ready when it says. The Word. How many think that was kind of watching Jesus was wanting from the three that went with him all night in the garden all night? Yeah. I don't think he was expecting them to sweat drops of blood with him because they just didn't understand it. But he also was wanting somebody to be a companion, to be there ready to help him in his need. Just alert to it. And they missed an opportunity. All right. Attentiveness, carefulness. The next characteristic we want to talk about a little while is obedience. This is a great story, and I probably better not read the whole thing. It's hard not to read the whole thing, so it's a great story. But it's in Genesis chapter 24. This is so un-American. Genesis 24. Before I read this, let me ask you a question. Does anyone remember anything about Genesis 15? God came, said to Abraham, I'm your great reward. What did Abraham say? Or Abram at that time, he hadn't had his name changed yet. What am I going to do with the reward? I don't have anyone to inherit it. My servant's going to get everything I got. And God says, I know, you're going to have a son. And I'm going to give you this land. And he believed God. He just took God at his word, and it was counted to him as righteousness. It's a key chapter in the whole Bible because of that phrase. Genesis 15:6, he believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness. Big deal in Romans. But he had his head servant who would have been the inheritor of everything he had. Now keep that in the back of your mind here as we begin to read this chapter. Abraham was old, advanced in years. And the Lord had blessed Abram in all things. If you go back and you read how rich Abraham really was. And even when he screwed up, told half-truths about his wife and almost got her in a serious issue in Pharaoh's house and didn't learn his lesson, did it again in Gerar, Abimelech's house, and he came out of it with them showering him with riches. It's amazing. He was old, advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had. Abraham wasn't managing any of his riches. This servant was managing it all. What would have happened if Isaac hadn't had a son? This servant would have inherited it all. Abraham goes to that servant who could have been jealous of Isaac. But he's not jealous of Isaac because he loves his master. And he goes to that servant and says, I got a job for you. Put your hand under my thigh that I can get you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven, God of earth, that you won't take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell, but you go to my country, to my kindred, and take a... I'm entrusting you with something. I've got this son. He had Ishmael. But Ishmael was not the covenant son. God made that clear. Isaac was the promised son. This is the chapter, a couple chapters after Genesis 22. This is the son, his only son, that God told him to go up and sacrifice on the mountain. So he went up to offer him up to the Lord, fully intending, Romans says, to kill him, knowing that if he killed him, at God's command, God would raise him from the dead because God said this is the promised son. This is that Isaac. It's pretty important in the purposes of God. That he's the descendant through whom all the nations, all the families of the earth are going to be blessed. And this is a big deal. And he says to the servant, I need you to go back to our homeland and get a wife for the boy. This is a pretty important job. This guy's going to go get the woman who's going to produce the heirs that are going to bless all the families on the earth. So he's a trustworthy man. So the servant says, perhaps the woman wouldn't be willing to follow me to this land. Must I then take your son back to that land? And Abraham said, see to it that you don't take my son back there. The Lord, God of heaven, took me from my father's house, from my kindred, spoke to me and said, to your offspring I'll give this land. He will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you're free from this oath of mine. Only don't take my son back there. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swore to him concerning the matter. That'd be like us having a serious handshake or signing a contract. So the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master. And he rose and he went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. And he made the camels kneel down outside the city. Hopefully you know the story. Girl, young lady comes out to get water, and she sees him there, and he prays ahead of time, Lord, let the girl that you want to be Isaac's wife come out and offer to give me a drink and give my camels a drink. And let that one be the one. God heard this guy's prayer. And the first gal that comes out is the one. Now, he doesn't know her name, he doesn't know her family background, he's just got this sign. She's the one. And then, certainly she does. She gives him water, she gives water to his camels, and then he says, well, who are you? And he tells the family, and it turns out that this is Abram's brother's grandchild. And it's just exactly the kind of person, or the family line, that the servant was looking for. This is a man of no little faith. But when he goes with, I want you to know some things. First of all, he got real clear what Abraham wanted. If you don't understand the task you're assigned and you're serving, you're not doing anybody a favor if you don't ask and get it clear. Be attentive and listen, but find out what they really want. If she won't come with me, should I take him there? No, don't do that. I want him to go there because God told us our inheritance here, and I don't want any chance of influence.
That's good.
God, here's the test. It's rather hard, but make it be the one that comes out and does this, and let her be the right one, and she's the right one. But he's wanting to be very precise, very careful. Then later in the story, after she's agreed to go, and her brother, who has charge of her, dad's dead, but her older brother says, well, she can go if she wants to, then she wants to go. But then they're wanting the servant to stay there for a few days. Well, stay and have dinner with us. You know, they're not wanting to let her go. And he's very insistent, no, I've got to get back. My master assigned me this job, I've got to do this job, we got to go now, or right away in the morning. And the brother says to the girl, are you willing to go that soon? And she says, yes, I'm willing to go. And off they go. So this guy is very, very clear to get the instructions. And it's one of the great stories of faith. But what I want to say to him is he's not only obedient, but he's very careful in his obedience. Not only to his master, but to the purposes of God, to get it done well, to get it done right. It's very, very important to him. So what do we pull out of that story? I'm shortening the story, but go back and meditate on it. But it's not just that story. Obedience is more than just doing a thing. You can outwardly comply and still be disobedient. You ever heard the story of a little boy who was, I don't know if he's hyperactive or ADHD or whatever that is, or whatever it is, but he's running all over the place, and finally somebody says to him, "Sit down and don't get up." So he sits down on the chair and says, "But I'm still standing up on the inside." And sometimes obedience looks like obedience, but it's not obedience. But we want to be people who are obedient in spirit. And I think Abraham's servant exemplifies that, because he wanted desperately to not just please his master, but to fulfill the purpose of God that his master had. A person who's obedient in spirit always wants to obey. Now I'm putting a qualifier here. A person who's obedient in spirit always wants to obey. There may be a time when they can't outwardly comply because it's a violation of God's word, it's a violation of conscience. I love that in Acts when the disciples are commanded not to preach in the name of Jesus. Remember? The apostles, Peter and John. And they said, well, you'll have to decide whether or not what you're going to do about it, but you're the authorities. You can do what you want to do. But we have to preach in the name of Jesus because it's our assignment. It's what he's told us to do. But what happened? They were willing to take the beating. They were willing to be put in jail. They had an obedient spirit even toward those wicked authorities who were against the purpose of God, even though outwardly they could not comply. That's obedience of spirit. Obedience of spirit makes a habit of preferring to obey over preferring to do one's own things. We call it back to 60s, to do what you want to do. A person who's obedient in spirit has a broken spirit. Anybody ever heard the word brokenness around here? Not a rebellious spirit, not an independent spirit, not a high-minded spirit, not a spirit of wanting their own way. Obedience needs to be not only in spirit, it needs to be from the heart. It needs to be genuine. It needs to be real. And if it is, then there'll be joyfulness in obeying. If it's not, it'll come out as fearful. Even if we do the right thing, it'll come out as fearful, come out as self-protective, it'll come out as reluctant, it'll come out as half-hearted, is the word we use. Right? So we need to be obedient in spirit, we need to be obedient in heart, we need to be obedient in mind. I talked about this in different ways. But a servant, now I'm not talking about violating the Word of God, but a servant conforms his thinking to the thinking of the person he's serving. If the person he's serving wants it done this way. Now, a good servant may well suggest, if you want to consider this, it might produce a better result if you do that. That's good servanthood, to offer a better alternative. But ultimately, he doesn't judge the master for which alternative he chooses. He conforms his thinking in his way, or her way, to the way of the master. He takes initiative to learn the will and the intent of the one he's serving. He submits his own judgment. You know, it's possible that sometimes when you think you've got just the right whoever you're serving. Billy? Dad? Karen says to Billy. It's just not going to work out the way you want. This is a better way to do it. And no, we're going to do it this way. It's interesting how many of those cases when it all turns out Billy knew something she didn't know. I'm just picking on Billy.
That's true. That's the case.
It's just uncanny how often, and certainly when we're dealing with God, He knows some things we don't know. Just one or two. And so we can learn their intent and submit our judgment
That's really good.
to their way of doing it. Offering our own contribution in humility, but trusting the wisdom and discernment of the one we serve. To be obedient not only in spirit, from the heart, with the mind, but to be obedient with the body. That is, to diligently and faithfully carry out the task. To promptly obey. What happens if you don't promptly obey? Well, you'll procrastinate, you'll forget, you'll hesitate, then you'll be in a rush to get it done, and mess it up, and on it goes. It just so happens that those four things, obedient from the heart, spirit, mind, body, they kind of go along with something else. See, what was that? What's the greatest command? Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Because serving is an expression of love. Godly serving. This is a new one. I was reading the other day in Proverbs. And probably if I'd been reading this in the typical translation, I use the ESV a lot anymore. Every couple of years it seems like I need to change translation just to keep it fresh so I don't just read over it without thinking about it. But ESV is what I've been using mostly lately. And it says, by mere words a servant is not disciplined, for though he understands, he will not respond. And it says the same thing, but the Bible I happen to be reading in my devotional this year is a translation of the Old Testament from the Septuagint, which was the Greek translation that the Eastern churches use. And it's kind of interesting because when you read it and you look at the Greek things in the Septuagint, you understand some things in the New Testament a lot better. It actually talks about the ecclesia, it talks about the gospel, it talks about New Testament words that aren't the same words. And you understand kind of where it comes from. And the other thing that's interesting about the Septuagint is because that was the common Bible, because the common language in the church, common language in the Roman Empire was Greek. Most of the quotations in the New Testament from the Old Testament come from the Septuagint. And you may wonder sometimes when you're reading along and say, Jesus says, out of the mouths of babes and nursing babes and infants, you've ordained strength for praise. You go back to the Hebrew version of the Psalms and it says strength, but the Septuagint says praise. But it's not a contradiction because the joy of the Lord is our strength. But he was, in that case, is the quotation that's included in the gospel is from the Septuagint. So anyway, I'm reading it. And it says this, and it was just so blunt that it caught my attention. A stubborn servant will not be instructed by words. For even if he understands them, he will not obey. And somehow when I read the other, and it said exactly the same thing, but it didn't grab me. That one grabbed me. A stubborn servant, I needed that word, will not be instructed by words. In other words, a stubborn servant might need some of that two before guidance I was talking about. For even if he understands them, he will not obey. And then there's a note in this particular version of Septuagint, this particular version of the Old Testament. It's a study Bible, and there's a note on this verse, and this is what it says. I thought this was powerful. Wisdom's instruction incorporates several aspects: teaching, correction, discipline, reproof, learning, education, and training. A stubborn servant is one who intends not to obey instruction, even though he may understand something of what is taught. We were talking last night about what it was like to be in the Catholic community and how I dealt with theological stuff. That's a whole different conversation. But it was interesting preaching there. It's kind of like my typical experience of preaching at teaching at CTS. Those people were so hungry for the Word of God because they weren't being fed on it regularly, that when I would speak and preach, it was scary because I knew that 85 or 90% of them were actually going to go out and try it when I preached. You know, a lot of people go to church Sunday after Sunday after Sunday and sit in messages and sit in classrooms and hear the Word of God and don't have one bit of attention. I know that's nobody in here, except some Sundays. But this really laid that out. That's a stubborn servant. It's somebody who's going in without the intent to do what they're being taught.
That's really good.
It really got me. I liked it. Now, I'm going to wrap up this evening with just some simple things from some verses of Scripture. That I got this from a guy named Don Dasher years ago. I'll tell you another funny story on me. What had triggered that thing about the vision about the two streams is I was really insecure being in a situation where all the leaders were Roman Catholic. And they went off, because I was raised in a background that was decidedly not Roman Catholic. Wasn't charismatic or Pentecostal either, so we were getting it from both sides. But I bought into the charismatic / Pentecostal, whatever. I didn't think of it in those terms, but I really come to see the gifts of the Spirit of the Word of God and that kind of thing. So I bought into that side, not necessarily all the theology that went with it and some other things. But it was a struggle. So the leadership, Hal, the guy I'm serving, and the other guys, they go off to this conference. And when they come back, remember the meeting rooms right down there by my office? And the main guys, the three lead elders, coordinators, they're sitting in there talking about what they heard and how they're going to implement it. And the teaching they heard at this conference of leaders was how important it is, if you're going to have a Christian community, we're going to have a culture that's a godly culture that we're building among ourselves, is to teach honor and respect and serving and those kind of things. And they were trying to really think that through. What practical things could we do, not trying to look for something extra biblical or whatever, but what just practical things could we instruct people in and encourage people to do that would develop a culture of respect and honor that would be a godly culture. And I wanted to say bad words. All I could see was, now, I know they were talking about, I didn't even know it was in the Bible at that point, I was so ignorant. They were talking about teaching people that when an older person comes in the room, you just do a simple thing like standing up. I was really getting upset. You know what I was thinking? I was thinking, next thing you know, they'll want us to come in and kiss somebody's ring or something, you know, like they do with the bishops or whatever in the church. And I'm making a big Catholic proclamation of it. Actually, Leviticus says stand in the presence of a gray-headed person. Well, you don't sit down. Oh. But it says that right in the book. So there's a culture of honor and respect is really right. What they were talking about was really right. What was wrong was my fear that I was going to be drug into something that was counter to my preferences and, you know, maybe take me off track. But it was surmixed with my own self-protectiveness. So
That's really good.
I went to fasting and praying again. I went down to my office on Saturday when nobody's there and I said, God, you got to get me out of here. These guys are going to get trouble. And that's when the Lord showed me how to put his strength. So Monday, I get a cassette tape. You probably don't know what cassette tapes are, but we used to have little things that were recorded. And lots and lots of sermons went out, not on podcasts, but on cassette tapes back in the old days. And I had signed up for this thing called New Wine Tape of the Month. And the very second one that came out, and I trusted these new wine teachers, and in actuality, they had actually been at at the same leaders conference these guys from our community did. So this Don Bastion I talked about, and this actually comes from that tape. What do you think the second tape in the New Wine Tape of the Month is titled? Serving and Being Served. This is 2 days after I had this crisis of faith at the office. And I realized that, and in fact, the Lord was protecting me because immature ways of teaching and handling the whole how do you serve issue is part of what got that movement in trouble with her. And I was in a context where there was a few older people and a little bit more wisdom about how to handle it, and I was blessed not to, because if I'd have been in the other context, I'd been one of the leaders teaching people the wrong ways of doing it. That's the truth. So, that's God's way. He protected me. But He sent me this tape, and I've loved it ever since. We read about Martha. This is another way of thinking about what Martha did. There wasn't anything wrong with Martha serving a meal. And probably Jesus would have very much appreciated it. But she served reluctantly. How do we know she served reluctantly? She wasn't serving from the heart. She was serving reluctantly. Therefore, she was judging her sister for not helping her. She went up to Jesus and said, Lord, she wasn't just judging her sister. She was judging Jesus. Don't you care? I don't recommend saying that to God. He can take it. But He may paddle your butt. One way or another. Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. A wrong way to serve is to serve with reluctance. This is some of the same things I already said. I don't have to belabor it. In the story of the prodigal son, we know about the prodigal, right? What was the elder brother's problem? He stayed home and he served faithfully. What was his problem? What did he say? I've served you all these years and you never killed a calf for me. He was serving to try to get approval and recognition, not serving out of love for his father. And his father says, man, everything I got is yours. I gave his brother his inheritance is all yours. You can kill a calf anytime you want to kill a calf. It's all yours. But he's not recognizing it his. He's serving for recognition. That'll get us in trouble. In Matthew 25, we read about the parable of the talents this morning. The guy who went off and buried his talent. How was he serving? Fearfully. Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you didn't sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid. And I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what's yours. To serve fearfully. Now, we're not talking about the fear of God that is to hate evil, the beginning of wisdom. We're talking about fear that will be less than perfect. We're talking about fear that somebody won't approve of us. We're talking about fear that whatever it is. I'm not. I pray mercy for the person that has fear of tests, but maybe somebody here, have you ever known anybody that they know the stuff, but they can't take a test, because when they get in a test, it just shuts down out of fear. That's a bondage that the Lord wants to free us from. Because God's not grading us with that kind of scale. He's grading us with love. Let me give the illustration this way. Dan, what happened? Your first child was a son, right? How old is he now? 2. What happened when he took his first step? He fell. And did you spank him for falling and make a mistake? Yep. You know it. He said, "Son, that was great!" It was terrible. He had hardly any balance, and it was only half a step at that, and he fell. But Dad's so proud, man. Right? What do you think your Father in heaven's looking on when we try to do something and we goof up? He's not sitting up there, whack, I got you. He said, Father's looking over, Jesus, look, he's trying. You know why we're fearful? Because we don't know God. We don't know the heart of God. He's a father, a good father. He's the father on whom all other fathers, good fathers, are modeled. Now that's a hard teaching in this day and age. I know a lot of you in this room have been blessed with pretty good dads. But a lot of people are touching this culture. That ain't true. And when you say dad, that's a fearful word. Or father, that's a fearful word. And people have to get to know the one who I think I'm supposed to say this for somebody. This isn't on servanthood, sort of. Back in the 1980s, we went through some very hard times. The community we were in Minneapolis went through division. A lot of the brothers and sisters I was close to left. Because of matters of conscience, on the issues, I agreed more with them, but as a matter of conscience, I didn't feel it was right to leave, but stay, try to be faithful. Then the Lord moved us down to Lexington, to be part of the church down here. And my friend who was already down here, and the Lord had already spoken clearly in ways that I'm going to here. It was clear we were supposed to move. But about 2 months before we got moved, he said to me, called me actually, and said, you know, you need to know something before you move down there. And he sent me a tape of a meeting that I was supposed to be able to pick up what was going on. He said, we had a community meeting and there's just a lot of uproar in the church and it's not sure where it's all going to go. And we came down here thinking, you know, we were coming into a church like mine and so forth. And we had about 550 people at that point. And over the next few years, well, now it's about 30 there. It took a long time to get there. It was definitely a slow installment plan. And it was really frustrating. I was disappointed in myself. I tried my best to do what God told me to do, what the Lord was leading me to do. But later, looking back at it, I realized some of the things I did in trying to deal with those splits and trying to hold the community together were more of the flesh than they were of the spirit. I was upset with myself. And frankly, I ended up, I had an anger problem already, but it wasn't always out on the surface. But I got angry for several years. And the despicable part of it was I didn't show my anger to my brothers, who would have loved me but corrected me and challenged me. Guess who I took my anger out of? My wife and kids, who were the most vulnerable, most trusting. And it was a bad season. It's a bad season. The Lord kept using me, kept blessing me, blessing us. I don't know why he does that, because he's a patient father. But finally, somewhere, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years into that, a guy came into town who was a friend from another church in Louisville at the time, and he had a ministry of praying with people and really getting down to deep issues that the Lord had helped him to do. And so with the guy that was giving me pastoral oversight, I sat down with him, and he started asking me questions, and some of the stuff that came up was, I don't even remember the specifics. I know he was asking me questions about my relationship with my dad and stuff, which I've given enough indications to know that there was some rockiness in that. And then he started praying for me. And when he started praying for me, he put his arms around me and was praying like a father for me. But I don't remember a thing of what he prayed. what I remember is I heard the Lord. And it was one of those times when I heard him, it was so clear, couldn't miss it, I know word for word exactly what, I can hear the tone of voice. If it had been out loud, it couldn't have been clearer. I'm at my, thought I was at my most despicable. I probably had a little bit more of that in me somewhere. It was ugly. And I hear this voice, boy, I like you. Now, if he said he loved me, I could believe that. I mean, he loved the whole world. He laid his life down for the ungodly. But for him, for my father, to say, boy, I like you. I wasn't like her. I didn't like me. I'm pretty sure my wife didn't like me a lot of the time. She loved me. That was huge. I love my dad. But love in our family was very conditional and performance oriented. As long as you were doing what they wanted, then you were loved. But if you weren't, one of Dad's weaknesses, and I think I know where it came from now, and I gave him a lot of approval, and I'm not trying to tell bad things about my dad, but one of his weaknesses was that he led a lot of time, not just his family, but even the church, he led by, and I don't have any inkling that he was aware of it, but he led by making me feel guilty for wanting to do something different than he wanted to do. Here's my father, who has every reason in the world to make me feel guilty. I said, boy, I like you. Now, he wasn't saying it's okay for you to act like a rear end. But he's saying, in spite of the fact that I was a rear end, he liked me. He was committed to me. He was going to stand with me. He was going to see me through. Boy, that motivated a whole different level of wanting to change. I don't know who that's for, but I think that's for somebody tonight. We're talking about serving someone who's not down on you when you goof up. Oh yeah, he'll correct us because he loves us, and he loves us too much to leave us in our mess. But it's always for our welfare. It's never because he gets any joy out of beating up on us or being hard on us. Oh, shoot. Judas served for personal gain. Why did Judas like being the treasurer, according to John? Why did he like carrying the common purse for Jesus and the apostles? Because he liked to spend a little of it himself here and there. He said that real clear. He served for personal gain and ambition, and therefore he was jealous when the woman comes in with the expensive perfume, breaks the alabaster box and anoints Jesus' feet. And Jesus says, hey, this woman's discerning. Whether she knows it or not, she's anointing me for my burial ahead of time. Judas is sitting there saying, look how much we could have bought for the poor. And how many extra CDs I could have had. Elisha had a servant named Gehazi. Gehazi served hypocritically, deceitfully. Remember when Naaman, the Syrian army leader, comes over with leprosy? The little servant girl who'd been captured and was a slave in his house says, man, if you could just go back where I came from, there's a man of God there, and he'd pray for you and you'd get healed. Think of her work. And Naaman goes in, we'll talk a little bit about that story in a couple minutes, but after he's healed, he wants to reward Elisha. what did Elisha say? He said, I'm not gonna be beholden to you, go on your way. I'm not gonna, this is a gift of God, you don't do this for me. And Gehazi gets to thinking, man, we could use a few things around here, and I can use a few things. So he sneaks out of the house and chases Naaman down and says, oh, my master remembered a few things we could use. And he gets back, and he's sneaking back and got his stuff, and Elisha meets him and says, where you been? If you're going to sneak and be deceitful, don't do it with the prophet. He said, Gehazi said, your servant went nowhere. That had some truth in it. But Elisha says, didn't my heart go when the man turned his chariot to meet you? Was it a time to accept money and garments, olive oil, orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen, male servants and female servants? Therefore the leprosy of Naaman will cling to you and your descendants forever. Pretty serious, isn't it? Now here's some right ways to serve. We want to end on a happier note. Joseph served anonymously. He served as unto the Lord. A lot of times we give Joseph a hard time. He's 17 years old, he had the dreams, and I've done it myself. Preached that, he probably was a little arrogant about that when he shared them with his brothers. Certainly stirred up some jealousy. But Scripture doesn't say that. It doesn't. I don't know if he was or not. He may have just been totally honest. May have revealed their problem, but they did get jealous. But the real quality of Joseph is his father sends him out to get his brothers. They're going to kill him. One of them talks him out of it. They put him in the pit. While that brother's gone, they get him out of the pit, sell him to the Egyptians, and he ends up a slave in Egypt to Potiphar. And he just goes about his business serving and does it so well that Potiphar puts him in charge of everything he has, except himself and his wife and children. And his wife wanted to be under Joseph's care too. But Joseph was smart enough to know that hadn't been given to him. But he didn't make a big deal about it. So Potiphar, when his wife lies on Joseph, Potiphar puts him in jail. What happens in the jail? He starts serving in the jail to the point where the jailer's, man, this is cushy, man. I got a prisoner here that'll do all the work for me. And Joseph's running the jail, but getting nothing out of it. And then the baker, the cupbearer come and he interprets their dream, and the one guy gets killed like the dream said, and the other one like the interpretation said, and the other one goes back and promptly forgets Joseph. And what's Joseph do? He goes right on for 2 more years serving, and there's no hint that he had a bad attitude about it or anything. Just went right on. Then Pharaoh had it. And then his servant remembers, because those guys are about to get killed. Oh, there was a guy that interpreted my dream, and he got it right. And they sent for Joseph. And Joseph ends up in command of Egypt. Everything in Egypt was under Joseph's command except Pharaoh himself. But it wasn't about him having a big name. You know how I know it wasn't about him having a big name? When his brothers came to the land, they were in there on 2 different trips, and they never once heard anybody say, this is that Hebrew slave that got brought over here. He just went about his business doing it, and then the story unfolded. So being willing to serve without calling attention to ourselves. I don't mind serving, just want to make sure everybody sees that. Okay. More than that, when it's all said and done, Joseph understood why he was there. It wasn't primarily about him being in jail and Potiphar. That was all training and testing. What was there for? His brothers are scared to death when they find out who he is, both right away and then later after their father died. They said, now our dad's dead. What did Joseph say? He said, look, you meant it for evil. But God had us in mind all the time. It was God's plan. He brought me here to save the family. he had a good intent in the whole thing. And so Joseph had a redemptive view of the whole thing. Right way to serve. David had some mighty men. Tells different stories about him. 1 Chronicles 11, I love that chapter. And there were 3 of the mighty men that heard David say when they were in a camp outside of Bethlehem, Saul was trying to kill David. And Philistines were around too. And they're outside the camp. And David's looking down off the hill or somewhere into the old hometown and says, man, sure would be nice to have a glass of water out of the old well down there. That's pretty. You can hear somebody saying something like that. I wish I could have an A-Lady out now. I'm from Winchester. If you don't know A-Lady, I'm not from Winchester. I mean, it's just like that. David's just talking, wishing. These 3 guys break through the Philistine camp and bring water back to David. And David is so moved, they risk their lives to go into the camp of the enemy to bring him a glass of water. And he said, man, I can't drink this. This is too awesome. I think, and he poured it out to the Lord. And that wasn't a disrepute of their thing. He said, I'm not worthy of that. But these mighty men, they weren't concerned about themselves. They loved David, their master, so much that they didn't even count their lives something to hold on to. We talked about Gehazi and Naaman. The slaves of Naaman were really pretty good guys. Remember when Naaman, this Syrian leader, gets down there? What did Elisha tell him he needed to do to be healed? Go down to the Jordan River and dip yourself 7 times and you'll be healed. And Naaman was steaming. You think I'm going down there in that dirty old muddy creek? We got good clean rivers back home. I could have done that anywhere. I'm not going to do that. And he's ready to march it up. And his servants begin to plead with him. Hey, if he had told you to go out and kill a dragon or some mighty feat of bravery, you wouldn't have hesitated to go do it. This is just a little thing. Wouldn't it be worth trying it? And they talked him into trying it. Nothing happened. 6 times down. The 7th time down, he comes up completely clean of leprosy. He'd have went home not healed if he hadn't had faithful servants. Now, these guys aren't just servants. These are slaves, probably captives of war, like the little girl in his house. They had every reason to gloat. This guy's so stupid that the prophet of God would speak to him and give him some little simple thing to do, and he won't do it because he's too proud. And they'd be pointing fingers at him and criticizing him, but not these servants. They're going to him and say, hey, Master, we love you. Can't you do this little simple thing? Maybe